Good morning. Let's talk today about stress a little bit and how it affects us. Then in the next topic, we're going to talk, focus more on coping strategies, in particular coping with stress. So first, we just kind of want to find out what stress is and what it does to us. So here we've clearly got a nice image of Homer Simpson with a little heart attack thing going on. And that may be a little extreme, but that's really not far outside the realm of normal. So stress as a definition, any circumstances that threatens or perceived as threatening, etc. Um, yeah, there's a lot of definitions of stress, but we'll just stick with this one for here. But the key to stress is that stress is in the eye of the beholder. Okay, stress is it's stress is not inherent in an environmental object itself. Stress is in the person that receives it. And so you take a look at the image in the corner here. Imagine a stressful event occurs, like a math exam. It's popped in front of you. So you appraise it. You look at it and you go, is this thing a threat to me? Is it something I cannot handle? In which it's now a stress response, okay? And well, you panic, you freeze up, etc. But the exact same environmental event, okay, the hard exam, can be placed in front of you, and you can see that, okay, you know what? This is a challenge. I need to bring together everything that I know what to do. I need to figure out what's going on. You become aroused, you become focused, and you solve the problem. So it's not the math exam itself that is stress. It is the appraisal of the environmental event. So the appraisal that we can talk about, we can divide into two sources, primary and secondary. The primary appraisal is all about whether or not it's going to be stressful or not to you, right? I mean, is this a threat? Is this a challenge, right? But the secondary appraisal is really where we're going to move when we get into the next topic on coping, because the secondary appraisal is what resources do I have at my command that can help me deal with this event? So, yeah, stress. Where does stress come from? Well, it can come from the environment. Ambient stress refers to you know what? I don't like this slide because I wanted to make reference to this right here instead. They called it ambient stress, but I'll tell you what, I've never in my life, other than the textbook when I created these slides many years ago, I've never heard of the word ambient stress. But it makes sense. It makes sense. Stress, which comes from, it's not an object per se, but the environment. So these are acute stressors. These are it's chronic stressors rather. These are the ones that kind of, things like poverty, for example. It just sort of, being in poverty is a stressful situation because every single day you see the bills and you can't pay them, and you see your neighbors having more than you, and on and on and on. Acute stresses, on the other hand, are those things that, they show up, you deal with them, they're gone, like the math exam. Okay, so the exam itself might be acute stressor, whereas taking the math class itself might be a chronic stressor. That's a good example. But it's an interesting idea because our modern world is filled with chronic stressors, and we're going to describe that in a little while. Some other sources of stress that are perhaps chronic, or that are a little bit beyond this notion of acute stressor and event and it's gone. Things like frustration, and again, this is poverty, right? You can't achieve your goals if you're poor, or internal conflicts between different options, or change. In fact, Holmes and Rahe, they put together a scale a long time ago, and it was called the stress scale? It must be Holmes and Rahe stress scale. I think that's what it's called. But anyway, what they did was they asked people, and they said, okay, stress can come from both positive and negative events, okay? And they said the biggest source of stress in one's life is change. And so they created a scale where they established life change units. And so they asked people, have these things happened to you in the last year? And they asked events, stressful events. And these stressful events were things like taking a hard course or something like that. But a stressful event could be, death of a loved one, but it could also be marriage. Okay? So it could be positive or negative because it's change. And so what they found was a very strong relationship. The more life change units that people had experienced, either positive or negative was irrelevant, the more life change units, the worse the physical health that people had. So there was a strong relationship between stress as measured by life change units and physical health. So lots of different things can be creating this stress. Now, one of the biggest responses we have to stress is, in fact, an emotional response. And we'll talk about emotions a little bit here, but emotions are physiological events, cognitive appraisals. They include a lot of different things, but some different emotional responses that can occur in response to stress would be, of course, annoyance or anger or apprehension, these negative things. But they're not necessarily negative just because we call them a negative emotion. In fact, all emotions, I like this, whether it be the positives or the negatives that are listed here, all emotions serve some kind of an adaptive function. I'm a big fan of evolution in all its forms, and I truly believe that all cognitive mechanisms, all physical, all things about you. You want to talk biological evolution and Darwin, and you can talk about, oh, a monkey's got a tail, and the function of the monkey's tail is to help it balance in the tree or something like that. Okay, so you can look at biological structures, and you can talk about the function, how they allow the organism to adapt to their environment. Well, I believe that cognitive mechanisms form the same kinds of adaptive functions. And so take as a cognitive mechanism, in this case, emotions. Emotions serve an adaptive function, or they wouldn't exist. I mean, I truly believe that they would not exist inside of us. And we find these emotional states seem to be shared by many other organisms other than humans. Seem to be, but be careful. I'm a behaviorist. I'm entering the realm of craziness there. But take a look, for example. Imagine there's a stimulus event, the left column. There's a threat. So we have this cognitive feeling, uh-oh, there's danger. So we have an emotional experience of fear. What does emotional experience of fear do? It triggers the behavior of run away. Okay? When you're afraid, you run away. And when you run away from that object, what happens? You go to safety. Ha! And so the emotional experience triggered an adaptive behavior that had the effect of taking care of the problem. Okay? And so it's really kind of a neat idea that even though these emotional responses to stress can be, quote, negative, they can be ultimately an adaptive thing. So emotional arousal in response to stress is often a good thing, because in the face of stress, what happens is you need to bring together your resources. You need to, get ready for action, something like this. Well, it turns out that in certain situations, stress can lead to arousal or vigilance, right? Like focused on task or something like this. Well, it turns out that if the task is a difficult task, if the challenge that we need to face is in fact difficult, then we see on this image here in blue, if it's a difficult task, we can see as arousal increases, okay, moving from the left to the right, performance increases, on the y-axis, the left side. And so you take a look, but you see what happens is that performance peaks at a relatively low level of arousal. And if arousal continues to increase, performance decreases on this difficult task. But we find a different relationship if it's an easy task, right? So we find that stress actually makes easy tasks better, or you perform better on an easy task with more stress. It's kind of a neat little function there. Well, when we respond to stress, there's a lot of different responses that we have, and we're going to talk about these physiological responses. We'll talk about 3 different physiological responses that the body gives in response to stress, and then the behavioral responses or coping strategies is, again, kind of what the next topic is all about. So the physiological responses to stress, number 1 is a fight or flight response. When we're faced with a stressor, what happens is our body goes into fight or flight. And so imagine there's a bear. A bear comes out and jumps up in front of you. And so what happens? Your body goes, okay, I need to get together, gather all my resources so that I can either fight the bear or run away from the bear. Okay, so you see in this image, or in this table, I guess, that what happens is that the sympathetic nervous system kicks in the gear. And the sympathetic nervous system is that part of our nervous system which gets us activated, gets us ready. Okay? And so what happens is that, look at this, the pupils will dilate, okay? Because if you need to fight the bear or run away from the bear, you need to gather as much information as possible. Open up the eyeballs. I can't even read this tiny little thing. What does it say? Okay, salivation decreases, okay? Save your energy. The skin starts to perspire. Yeah, you start to perspire because chances are if you're about to deal with the bear, things are about to heat up. And perspiration is a way to cool off the body. We find respiration increases. Yeah, we start to breathe more because guess what happens? If you're going to fight a bear, you need oxygen in your blood, oxygen out to your muscles, okay? And so the heart begins to accelerate, okay? You need to pump the blood faster to get it out to the muscles. Digestion slows down, okay? In other words, if you're digesting a peanut butter sandwich, let's just turn that energy off at the moment. But another thing that's very important is the blood starts to in fact pool up at your arms and legs, okay? So the blood gets out to your arms and legs, which is very important, right? You want to oxygenate it so you breathe faster. Your heartbeat pumps, puts it out there. But see, what's going on is if you're going to, deal with the bear or either fight or run away, the muscles in your arms and legs need oxygen, okay? They need it. They need the energy. And so what happens, though, is this creates a situation where there's not enough blood left at the heart, right? There's so much out. But you know what? If there's a bear in front of you, who gives a crap if there's not enough blood right now in your heart area? Because you got to deal with the bear, okay? And so what happens is that in the situation of the bear, remember the difference between an acute stressor and a chronic stressor. The bear is an acute stressor. You deal with the bear. You fight it, you run away, something. You deal with the bear, problem solved. And so what happens is as soon as you've solved that problem, then all of a sudden on the right side of that table, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and it does pretty much the opposite, or it saves energy, conserves energy. Well, the problem is in the modern world, we're sitting here with not acute stressors. Rarely are we going to have bears in front of us. Instead, what's going to happen is we're going to have chronic stressors. We're going to have, traffic problems day after day. We're going to have not enough money day after day. We're going to have, and so what happens, the body is often in a chronic state of fight or flight. And again, when the body's in a state of fight or flight, all of the blood pools up at the arms and legs. And so what happens in this situation of chronic stress is that not enough blood is left at the heart to clear away cholesterol. And so cholesterol, which would normally just be washed away by the blood, a healthy blood flow, will start to build up and clog the arteries. And so all of a sudden you're going to start to have heart disease and stuff as a response to chronic stress. Another response, physiological response, there it is, to stress is something called the General Adaptation Syndrome, or the GAS. This is Hans Selye's conception. And so what happens for stress responding is that in the, you can see along the left, along the left side is stress response. No, what does it even read? Stress resistance, that's it. Ability to resist stress. And so straight up the middle is some kind of a baseline level, okay, the middle level. So we can see at the far left what happens is that's your sort of baseline little spot there. And then a stressor occurs, a stressful event occurs, and you see what happens is your ability to resist the stress in fact decreases very shortly for there, but then you see what, it comes back up. And so sudden, this is where the fight or flight response kicks in. You gather your body's resources, you are ready to deal with the challenge. You see the resistance peaks there during phase 2, which is that's right, a long resistance phase. During the resistance phase, you've got your resources, you're dealing with the problem, no problem. But if the stressor continues long enough, and that's what chronic stress is all about, you see what happens in the third stage there, the third phase rather, the exhaustion phase, is that the stress resistance plunges. As a very good representation of this image. Here's a terribly tragic story. There was a situation where these two brothers, they kidnapped a mentally retarded. I mean, they became friends with her and kidnapped her and brought her to their mobile home. And they chained her up in the mobile home, and they were basically stealing her Social Security checks, right? So stealing her money. And so what happened was, at one point, about 6, 8 months later, the woman's dead. So the coroner comes in and they're like, okay, we want to charge these two with murder. So coroner, tell us why, what caused her death. And the coroner does his autopsy and says, I got nothing here. I mean, she's got clearly months of cigarette burns and broken bones that have healed funky, and because these guys were just spitting on her, kicking her, just mistreating her for months. And so at the end, the coroner's just like, I don't have a cause of death. Well, the answer is the cause of death is this phase 3 exhaustion phase, right? Clearly, when she was put into this stressful situation, her body was able to bring together resources, was able to deal with the challenge. But once this stressful situation occurred for a long, she just ran out of resources to deal with it, and her body just gave up. All right, the immune system shut down. There was nothing left. That was a terrible story, but it's a good representation of it. And also in response to stress, we find that there are some brain-body pathways. Clearly, there are things well beyond the appraisal stage, right? So as we said, stress is an appraisal process. And at the same time, our body is physiologically wired in some ways to deal with stress. You see in this image here, what you've got is a snake, okay? And so what happens is, the image of the snake comes in through the eyeball, and you see what happens is that the image goes to the thalamus, okay? To the thalamus. The thalamus is a part of your brain that is responsible for organizing information. It's responsible for taking this information and matching a really crude fashion. What is this thing? I mean, from the crude sense, is this an audio signal? Is this a visual signal? Is this a taste? All right? Something like that. And it sends it out to the appropriate area of the brain for processing. So what's happening now is the thalamus has some markers in it. It has some preset patterns that are sort of like warning flags. And so all of a sudden the image of the snake triggers a warning flag in the thalamus. But the thalamus does say, number one, this is in fact a visual image. Okay? Look at this, out of the thalamus, moving over to the right. It's going to send the signal over to the visual cortex. Great, it's a visual. But because the image of the snake set off some kind of a warning flag, the thalamus will also send a signal out to the amygdala. The amygdala would be part of the, I've been on break too long. The brain's emotional centers. It's responsible for emotions. The limbic system, you see. The amygdala is part of the limbic system. The limbic system and the amygdala in particular are responsible for things such as fear responses, reactions, or more specifically, avoidance. And so what happens is that this image of a snake comes in to the thalamus. It is sent to the amygdala. We have an emotional reaction. We jump. And we jump even before the image has, in fact, reached the visual cortex. And we think, oh, it's not even a real snake. It's just a rubber snake. So if you want to see this in action, this immediate reflexive thalamus to amygdala to behavioral response, you just go up on Google and Google up cats and cucumbers. See what you find, all right? You'll see this pathway and then this poor cat's jump and hit the ceiling. So different effects of stress of time, prepared, task performance. Obviously performance goes down. Disrupting cognitive activity. Yeah, because basically what happens is, as we said, during stress and during the fight or flight response, all non-critical systems shut down. All right, and so clearly they are critical, just not for them. Clearly, especially chronic stress can lead to burnout, physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. A lowered sense of self-efficacy, which in this case is sort of like self-worth, sort of something like that. We can have depression, schizophrenia, anxiety. In fact, what we find is that there's not just these kinds of psychological responses, right? But there's actual physical reactions. And I already described the heart disease thing, right? The blood flow isn't healthy enough. But another problem is that during the fight or flight response, was it on there? What was it? It was this one. Here. Does it put it? I can't read it up there again. Oh, it doesn't even say it. But one of the responses that's not on this image is that the immune system shuts down. Because it's like, oh, let's see, what's more important? At this moment, there's a bear in front of you. You need to either fight the bear or run away from the bear. So let's say, for example, there's a cold virus. I think that maybe the cold virus at this moment is just not important compared to the bear, okay? So shut down that immune system, shift its energy over towards dealing with the bear. And so that fight or flight mode is incredibly expensive. It costs a lot of energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. And so, yeah, when we're under a lot of stress, our immune system tends to shut down, and all of a sudden what happens is that I don't know if you're aware of it, but cold sores are a virus. And once you've had a cold sore once in your life, you will have them for the rest of your life, all right? It lives inside your spinal cord. It's a little creepy. It's up inside of your spinal cord, and it's always trying to come to the surface, always trying to come out. Meanwhile, though, your immune system, generally speaking, has the ability to hold it back. Can say, okay, stop, stop, stop. But what happens is when we're under stress and we're in this chronic state of fight or flight, and all energy is being diverted to maintain fight or flight, the immune system suffers, and boom, out comes a cold sore. Okay, so we find that this is pretty straightforward. In fact, they've done some really straightforward studies. They took dental students. I don't know how they got these kids to volunteer, but they took dental students and they gave them a puncture wound. I don't even know what that means. Right in the middle of their palm. Okay, and if they did it during the middle of the semester, versus if they did it during finals week, presumably when they were under a lot more stress. During finals week, it took much, much, much longer to heal than if they did it just in the middle of the semester. Factors influencing stress tolerance, and a lot of this is actually related to the coping chapter, so I don't want to spend or coping topic. We don't have chapters because we don't have a book. We have topics. But social support, hardiness, optimism. Yeah, clearly optimism has a lot to do with that appraisal process. Do you, when the exam is put in front of you, appraise it as a challenge that you can deal with, or do you appraise it as a stressful event which is going to overwhelm you, right? But a variety of others, and again, we'll come back to that more in the next topic. So here's kind of an image that sort of describes the relationship between stress and health. We see life events. Things happen. We appraise them. We can appraise them as challenges or as threats. We come in with different personality types, okay? Some people are easygoing. Some people are much more hostile, shall we say. We can refer to different types of people as type A people and type B people. Type A people would be the hostile ones. Those would be the ones that are hard-driven and aggressive, that they're much more likely to appraise an event as dangerous or something. Whereas type B people are much more relaxed and easygoing, and they tend to look at stress or events in the environment not as a threat, but rather as just something to deal with. So type A people, which are hostile, versus type B people, which are much more easygoing. Well, you can combine that with personal habits such as smoking or etc. Combine it with social support, and again, that's much more in the coping chapter. And so then what we find is that the tendency towards health or illness as related to stressful events in the world have all of these factors involved. All right, we can talk about reducing stress through self-control or behavior modification. Often it's our own own bad habits that are creating the stress, in particular things like procrastination, for example. And so what we find is that behavior modification is an interesting technique. It's a technique which you will find in a lot in educational psychology literature and a lot in, of course, clinical psychology literature. But behavior modification is an approach to changing behavior by using the principles of conditioning. When I say conditioning, I mean learning. Okay, so the principles of learning in reward and punishment. So behavior modification programs, or if you want to modify yourself, I guess I generally hear about behavior modification programs as being organized by a clinician or a school psychologist or something like this. But yeah, you can do self-modification. Why not? And it's basically the same set of required steps. Okay? Number one, specify a target behavior. Okay, you need to, and I mean, if you were doing a typical behavior modification program, say for example in a classroom, you could not just say Johnny's a bad kid. No, 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 no. Very specific. Johnny stands up without raising his hand during class time. Aha! I have a specific behavior. So if you want to successfully modify your own behavior, you have to target a very specific, not a broad category or something, a specific one. Then what you do, whether it be Johnny in the classroom or yourself, you need to gather some kind of a baseline data. Before I create any kind of an intervention or change, what is the level of this behavior to begin with? Then you design a program. Okay, again, targeting specific behaviors. And what you're going to do is create a situation where when Johnny stands up in the classroom, this is going to be what I don't want to say punishment, because we don't like to use punishment in behavior modification because it sounds terrible. So instead, we'll implement a reward system. When Johnny sits in his seat and raises his hand, we will give Johnny a sticker. Okay, so maybe you're going to, you could punish the bad behaviors or reward the instances of positive, or when the behavior is not exhibited. Okay, you want to execute and then evaluate the program, and again, evaluate it in relation to the baseline data. Okay, because clearly if Johnny was standing up 500 times a day and now he's standing up 10 times a day, 10 is still a crappy number, but wow, okay, compared to 500, you've made a real difference. Look at this. I said all of this stuff. Blah, blah, blah. Track frequency. I said that. Identify antecedents and consequences. That's actually pretty powerful. Often one of the most important parts about a behavior modification, whether it be Johnny or yourself, is to find what is the reinforcement that is driving the behavior. When Johnny stands up in the classroom and starts talking, does he get laughter from his classmates? Maybe the laughter is in fact the reinforcement that's driving that behavior. All behavior is driven by its consequences. That's a major finding of all conditioning or learning work. Behavior is driven by its consequences, and so if you find that Johnny is being reinforced by the laughter from his classmates, maybe you just need to remove or find a way to eliminate that reinforcement. Design, increase response, selective. Shaping, yeah, shaping. Sometimes what happens is that the behavior itself is very complex. And sometimes, say for example, you want to change behavior, but what you want to change is very, very far from what you're currently doing. And so maybe what you need to do is reinforce incremental steps towards it. Let's say in a simple one, you want to modify your behavior. I want to be making my bed every single morning. Well, at this point, you don't even have sheets on your bed. So you're like, okay, maybe what I'll do is I'll start by modifying the behavior such that I make sure that the pillow has a pillowcase on it every day. Aha. Then, after I have successfully gotten that step completely and utterly done, then I add the second one. So, I don't know, I'm spitballing here. I don't know if that's a good example, but shaping is the idea that if you want to modify behavior, and the behavior you would like to create is so far from what you currently have, that it will never occur unless you build up to it. Huh? Execute and set terminal goals. Okay, set terminal goals. That's right. Am I satisfied with 10 times per day that Johnny gets up? How many is, what's an acceptable number to have? All right, so we got that one. We'll come back in the next topic and we'll essentially just do a big follow-up on this, and that is coping strategies to deal with it. Since this is the psychology of everyday life and we want to apply the principles of psychology, first we needed to lay out what is stress, and next we need to deal with how to cope with it.